Hi, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the BAMF podcast. I'm Mike Lafferty, and today we're doing another episode in our series of IGDN Spotlights. Today we are talking to Alan Bahr. And Will, help me out with the name of your company. I just blanked on it for a second.
Yeah, Adept Icarus.
And you guys are putting out Cyan Starlight. It's on Kickstarter right now, correct?
Yes, sir.
So,
Yep.
is that you, Will?
That's me.
Nice. All right. Well, hey, let me do our brief contractually obligated opening music, and then we'll jump into conversations. Just one sec. There we go. And despite all appearances, that opening musical montage represents that we are a high production values, high quality podcast. Finest farm to table, ethically sourced geeky conversation for your podcast listening pleasure. So, anyway, good to have you guys on. Alan, this is your project. Can you tell us a little bit about Cyan Starlight?
Well, this is Will's project. I'm just the writer developer person.
Well, over to you.
Sure. Cyan Starlight is a lonely science fiction solo role-playing game where you are the last human alive that you know of in space. You wake up alone and you have to try and figure out what's happened. And the stars are bathed in a odd blue hue.
Okay. Hence the name Cyan Starlight.
That's right.
Pretty much.
Okay. Is it a lot of solo RPGs use journaling as the play mechanic? Is that what you guys are using here?
No. So Cyan Starlight uses a very procedural gameplay loop that based on the Breathless system by Fari RPGs. So there's a lot of resource management. You have to manage your starship yourself, your emotional despair, hope, as you try to find clues as to why humanity has disappeared.
Okay, that is interesting stuff. I'll be sharing a PDF here in a second. If you guys don't mind, we can page through that while we're talking about the game.
Absolutely.
So, hey, we have an audience here, and hey, good to see you, Renee. Thanks for showing up.
Renee Pierre is the fellow who developed Breathless, actually. So they are there being fancy and hopefully not yelling at me for abusing the rule set too much.
That would be some fun on-air drama. But
no, I don't think it would be very fun. Actually, I'm going to go on a limb and say it would, in fact, be the opposite of fun.
Fair enough. Well, they say comedy is tragedy plus distance, so perhaps funny one day far in the future. And speaking of far in the future, back to Cyan Starlight. So for someone who's not familiar with solo RPGs, there's not really a victory condition, right? It's more, you're looking for the experience of play.
No. Well, so traditionally, yes. A lot of solo RPGs. I'm gonna put on my game designer academic hat here. There are, in my opinion, 2 to 3 major branches of solo RPGs. You have the epistolary, which is like the journaling or the letter writing. Then you have the more traditional GM replacement solo RPGs, where they use a lot of tables and mechanics to replace a GM, right? A tool they call oracles in the solo community. So a lot of solo RPGs very much are in that vein of either you are journaling or you are maybe doing a dungeon crawl, to use the classic fantasy paradigm, right? And getting the loot is sort of the end game, but you could play as much as you want. Cyan Starlight is actually a little different in that you are searching for clues as to why humanity has vanished. And so there is actually a win condition, because you travel from planet to planet, system to system, trying to find these insights, is what we call them in the game. As you find these insights, they unlock clues. And once you have 3, you unlock one of 512 unique narrative endings to your search. And when we say ending, we mean a stopping point for the story. It doesn't mean that everything's been resolved. It doesn't mean that you found the secret necessarily. There's 512 after all. Not all of them will tell you what happened. But there is sort of a narrative place to end your story.
Fair enough. So it's a mystery.
It very, very much. You are trying to
Yes.
gather these clues in sort of a procedurally generated way as we roll through this galaxy.
And
Okay.
survive. There's definitely a survival component as well.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it survival horror in the same sense, but it would definitely, it's more of a survival resource management, stress-based environment rather than something that's horrific.
Okay. So you said we were inspired by 70s science fiction. Actually, right here on the author's note, we're talking about 70s science fiction.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the specific properties that you were thinking of as you were writing this game?
Yeah, so the Foundation novels, classic. I used to read a lot of technical papers by futurists from the 70s and 80s. So a lot of stuff that you might, Carl Sagan papers, watching Cosmos, right? All the pieces like that. Foundation, as well as the new Foundation TV series. There's a lot of, that era kind of what I would call big idea classic science fiction, where science fiction has gotten a little more cynical maybe over the years, which isn't necessarily bad, but I wanted to harken back to that big idea, sort of what is humanity's potential. And then there's some more modern stuff like Red Dwarf I'm a big fan of. The Traveler RPG was an influence, Expanse to a degree. So stuff that you might call quote unquote big idea sci-fi, like Star Trek or similar.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Red Dwarf. I actually saw Carl Sagan speak once live when I was in college.
Oh wow, nice.
Yeah, I was. He is a very charismatic public speaker. I was really pleasantly surprised. So
I've watched a lot of panels or recordings or sort of presentations and really insightful stuff.
yeah, it was a lot of interesting thoughts going on there. Okay, well, paging through the book, I like the layout and design, kind of the sparse black and white. Really kind of evokes that lonely feel I think you're going for.
Thank you.
I definitely like some of these starships. So do you have one artist for all the art in the book, or maybe a mix? Or
So the cover is by Catapulca, which is a two artists who run a Patreon where they do stock art, and so the cover is from that stock art of theirs.
okay,
And then the interior art is all from The Forge, which is stock art. The whole game was made with stock art.
oh okay.
So The Forge is the interior artists, and then Catapulca, the team of two, did the cover.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know which one, unfortunately, of the two did the cover necessarily, because when they release them, they don't delineate. So unfortunately, I just credit them as Catapulca. So if I find out, if you're listening, Catapulca, just reach out and tell me, and I'll fix it. I just don't know.
No worries. No worries. So how's Kickstarter going?
It's going really well. We had I think a really solid launch, and a lot of continued interest over the last several days. We launched on Tuesday, and yeah, it's going. We're really happy.
Okay, you guys are pretty brave launching during the holiday season. Hats off for taking the risk on that.
Well,
yeah,
the small business grind doesn't stop.
No, it doesn't. And we had a bit of a suspicion that maybe the market would be a little thin, and there's got to be some people out there who are interested in finding out what's on Kickstarter. Got to keep scratching their itch, right? Even when there isn't a lot. So, yeah.
Wow, you guys! I mean, you're over 200% funded, heading towards 300% the fast clip. So, congratulations! You've done really well. I've always been told don't ever launch during Christmas time because but shoot, you guys seem to be flying in the face of that conventional wisdom. So good for you. That's awesome.
Well, somebody's got to try, and if we had the advantage of I had written and laid out the game using stock art, so overhead was low, which allowed our funding goal to be low,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, because basically we're just paying for printing, and then Adept Icarus doing the distribution and management of that, right? So
yep.
We if this was done with custom art all the way through, etc., I'd definitely be looking for a higher goal, which probably means we wouldn't have risked it over the holidays. But
yeah,
cool. So let's talk about music because this is unique. You guys have a soundtrack that accompanies your game.
Yeah, that's right. So in the original goal, there's a 5-track sort of ethereal kind of atmospheric soundtrack, and most of it, 4 of those 5 tracks, are licensed from an artist named Lance Clark, who's somebody who I've been in contact for a long time. I found his music a long time ago, and have talked with him about putting it, associating it with solo games. I've got another solo game I'd like to work with him on at some point in the future, but it was so good. And then he came and watched Alan and I and Emily Earhart doing an actual play stream probably a week and a half ago, something like that. And he was so inspired by the game and by how the gameplay went and everything. He immediately started composing a new track that is specifically for Cyan Starlight. So we have a main theme for Cyan Starlight that was composed by Lance Clark. It's beautiful. We have it in the Kickstarter video now. We have a link to it on the page that you can listen to it directly. And then we have those 4 other tracks. And because we just passed $5,000 today on our funding, we unlocked 5 more tracks from Lance Clark as well. Because while we were talking about it, he kept sending me more tracks. And man, like, a lot of them are really good. And so we just kind of kept going, and we're like, you know what? Let's do a few more. So that's what we're doing. So we're going to have a 10-track soundtrack available on, in digital formats. And I think we'll have probably a playlist that folks can go listen to on SoundCloud if they want to. But also, because Alan relentlessly pestered me, and he was right, we are also creating a magnetic audio cassette tape that goes with the physical pledge. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Yeah,
it's nice when the stretch goals kind of present themselves like that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
So
what was happening?
Yeah.
Huh?
I was prepared to rip the music and make myself one, so it's just easier to do it this way.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to get boring and geeky for a second. How are you making cassette tapes in this day and age? You guys.
Well, so I've got a microphone next to my other recorder, and I've got one over here, right? So I put a fresh tape in. No, I'm just kidding. We have a production partner who makes tapes.
Yes.
Okay. No, I figured I've seen these as promotional items at trade shows and stuff like that. You got to have a guy, right? There's got to be someone who does that.
There's a large segment of the small press indie RPG scene that likes cassette tapes, and I'm one of them. And I buy a lot of cassette tapes from various Kickstarters where they make them alongside vinyls with their RPGs or other material, and so I've always wanted to do one myself. So,
Oh, cool. Yeah, I did a soundtrack for a game myself a few years. Oh God, 10 years ago now, and
I love that.
It was definitely a lot of fun to work with the composer to try to get the feel and try to. I felt pretentious doing it, but I was like, I kind of want to give people. You're aiming to give someone a play experience. You hope someone just doesn't read your book and forget about it. And this is part of that. This is the soundscape that goes along with it. So.
And I think it's really relevant to solo RPGs where they are very much about sort of self-immersion, or you don't have other people to bounce off on, right? So you are whatever tools you have to immerse yourself in the game become really really viable and valuable, and so I definitely think music is part of that.
Yeah, definitely hurts. But as you guys mentioned in the book, and you just talked about it, the game can be played, with multiple people, just a few tweaks. So, can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it's interesting to have that versatility in one game.
Well, it's sort of one of the benefits of the more rules heavy or procedural solo game space is that the only rules you need to make a solo are the ones that replace the GM. So if you take those out, then you just have a traditional GM, right? It requires very little actual design effort other than saying, hey, and then the tables just become GM tools to generate stuff in advance rather than stuff that you generate on the fly as you are playing by yourself.
Okay, fair enough. That all makes sense. So cool.
It's one of the things I tell people when they talk about solo gaming, and what I say a lot is, if you're a GM and you're used to rolling on tables to generate your adventures or hexes for a hex crawl or what have you, right?
Mhm.
All it is just they've solo games, the more procedural ones, they change the point at which you interact with the tables. Rather than being in advance, they become steps in the game in the procedure. That's it. That's like kind of the core foundational element of using things like oracles.
Okay. Now you had a very specific tone and theme you're going for in this game. Do you find? I mean, I'm assuming playtesting was both solo and in groups for you guys. Did you find it harder or easier, or was the tone a little bit different depending on if you were solo or with other people, or pretty much the same experience either way? I didn't mean to stop all conversation with that question.
No,
Sorry.
that's a hard question.
No.
It's a good one though.
It is a hard question. The playthroughs that I've done, so I've played the game several times myself, just in solo. And I think, I mean, we're actually streaming, playing 3 of us now. We're not doing it with GM, right? We're just kind of doing this really sort of weird 3-headed approach. But I feel like the theme comes through pretty strong, because the types of actions that happen, driven by the game's engine itself, lend themselves toward that type of story.
Okay, cool. We should probably mention Breathless, since that's the engine that we're using.
Yes.
Let me pull up that tab right now. And Renee, thanks for showing up. Feel free to chime in the comments if you'd like.
Breathless is awesome. Folks should use Breathless and design games around it. I'm just going to say that like at the outset.
So tell me a little bit about. I saw this mentioned in your book, but I hadn't looked at this myself.
Yeah.
I can read this off the screen. It's more interesting if I ask you to describe it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Will can jump in too, but Breathless is functionally, it's about what it costs you to succeed rather than the risk of outcome, right? So Breathless assigns die sizes to your equipment, to your kind of approaches or attributes. And you roll them, and based on, there's like a 5+, you do it, 3 through 4, you do it, but there's a cost. 1 through 2, you fail and there's a cost. But the big piece is every time you roll the die, they decrease in size automatically. Okay. And so with equipment, tools, things like that, once they hit D4 and you use them, they break or they fade away or they no longer become narratively relevant. Whereas with your stats, they just stop at D4, but because they're stopped at D4, you can never achieve anything without cost anymore because you're too exhausted, you're too worn out, you've been pushed too far.
So the stakes are going higher and higher as you get further in the game.
It creates a parallax bell curve of the stakes are going this way, and your resources are going this way. And so the game narrative is kind of going in opposite directions from the 2 different dials, and it creates a really tense sort of mechanic. But there's a lot of cool things to it, and it lends itself really well to solo play because the idea of this decreasing what will it cost me to do it frames questions in a really intelligent and solo friendly way.
Because the stakes, I guess I'm repeating myself, but the stakes become more and more clear and more heavy as you go into it.
Exactly. Right.
So,
and then that solo play depends on things being clear without needing a GM to explain them to you. And so the more the rule set also enables that on top of tables and the book and everything, I think you get a better solo experience with this kind of game.
Interesting. Well, this is cool. Hey, we've got, let me double check before I say something, 17 days left. So going well into the new year. Have you guys thought about more stretch goals at this point, or just percolating a few ideas you're not ready to talk about, or where are you at with that one?
We have thought about more stretch goals for sure. We actually have one that's announced currently that we could talk about really easily. Beyond that, I don't know, we might maybe mention something. We could maybe tease something, could be fun. So when we hit $7,000, actually, we're going to unlock an additional author who's going to join the team in Mari Murdoch. Mari is a collaborator that both Alan and I have worked with previously, who's an amazing writer of fiction and prose and also, game stuff. So she is going to do a playthrough of the game and journal her experience and then write a short story based on that experience.
Oh, wow, that's fun.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Okay. And I'm pretty sure you're going to make that given your current clip. So
odds are pretty good. Yeah.
Do we?
I really hope so, because I really love to see it.
Yeah.
It sounds like that would be fun. Now
Me
that's
too.
going to be a short story plus a journal, right?
Yeah. She wrote a short story intro for another little book that I did not too long ago that has, kind of this lonely vibe to it that's just so cool. And I thought, she would be perfect to write something for this. So,
If you've read my game for Poignant Blood, she wrote some of the fiction in that book, as well as she's written a bunch for the various Tiny D6 games over the
yeah.
years. So
Nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. I probably should mention at the top of the show. A lot of my listeners will probably recognize you from the Tiny D6 universe of games.
yeah,
And you previously,
I've been on a few times.
yeah. I'm still very grateful to you for running your Baywatch homage game a few years back. That was a lot of fun.
That was a while ago too. That was what, 4 years ago now.
It wasn't the before times. It was before COVID. Yeah, everything was different. Things were in black and white. It was a whole different world. So, but
Now it's
yeah,
all bathed in cyan.
that's all
right.
bathed in cyan. So, well, it has been great having you guys on. Let me ask you, do you have any other questions or any other comments before we wrap things up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I want to talk about what I think is one of the coolest things about this game, because to me, so those are people who kind of followed my design career, is that I'm always trying to find new ways to communicate stories and everything, right? With the games I make. And so one of the reasons Adept Icarus was the perfect partner for me with this particular game is, one, because I've known Will for a long time, since before I was making games. And so we have a good working relationship because we're friends outside of work. But two, Will comes from a technology background, and so he knows various things. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is find ways to enable more technology in games without compromising the core value proposition of a pen and paper RPG, right? And I'm not talking AI stuff or anything like that, but I'm talking like, with Cyan Starlight, the way you find out one of these 512 endings is you can just make your own up based on the prompts in the rule book. Or there's a QR code and a link in the rule book where you can go to a website and enter the prompts, and it will generate one of those 512 endings for you. And I've written all the portions of those. And so it creates, off of the portions I've written, it creates a unique kind of composite ending of the discrete elements. And so we're trying to do things like that, where we were saying, look how technology can be used to enhance games. It doesn't have to replace them. It doesn't have to become this digital only process, but we can use it to create sort of an evergreen, living, almost game book, where we don't have to worry about necessarily printing new editions all the time, but we can add new content through this delivery system, right? To add more to your game without compromise. Like, for me, the goal is I don't want to compromise what you get in the book, because I love my physical RPG books. I love getting them. I don't ever want to take away from that, but I want to find ways to enhance that in a way that is both friendly to small presses, but makes the process and product better.
That is a really cool idea. I haven't heard too many publishers doing that. Usually digital involvement will just be like an online, maybe character generator, or I've known some folks like to throw, video files in, with adventures or saying that kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's really interesting.
And I mean, I don't want to say nobody's ever done it before, because that means somebody has, and somebody will come out of the woodwork to tell me, obviously, which they should. But I can't think of anything in my extensive RPG experience that is quite like this. And we're not using anything crazy. It's like a QR code that goes to a website that has a backend script to generate, to add the pieces together and show them to you. Like, we're not reinventing the wheel here.
No.
But we're just trying to use existing tools in a way to enhance the game. And I think Will can really talk more about this than me. That's my design philosophy behind it. Now Will can tell you about the actual stuff.
Well, I don't want to get too in depth on the tech, because it's just,
Right.
It's web tech. It's been around for 20, 30 years now, right? It's not, like Alan said, it's nothing particularly innovative. There's definitely no AI, right? It is a very mobile friendly.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a very mobile friendly design. So there's that. So you can use it on your phone if you want to. You can use it on a desktop. Is totally fine. And yeah, everything should work just fine that way. And the beauty of it is, like Alan said, like, we can expand, right? We can add other things if we want to, right? We can evolve what's there without necessarily having to charge people for a new book. in some cases, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Have you done this kind of living artifact online before for other releases?
No, I've done what you described previously, right? I've done online character generators and also online story prompts, which are sort of similar type of thing where you randomly kind of present a story. Flash actually is what we call them in one of my other games. But that's pretty much the extent of it. Nothing quite to this level of interaction and sort of cool things that we're planning to do.
Okay. No, that's we could almost do a whole show just talking about this. This is a really interesting idea. But are there plans for more in the in this kind of vein, using that kind of technology with Cyan Starlight or other games, or it's still kind of in the germinal stages?
I mean, I think that the proof is in the pudding a little bit, right? We have to see how successful it is. Is it something that people like, right? It's an experiment, and experiments can go good and they can go poorly. So we'll just have to see what happens.
The benefit is, like, we know in terms of the experiment, the technology works. Obviously, we're not using anything that requires new code or new work or new develop, right? Like, so the experiment will be like, do people enjoy it? Do they like it? And we want people to tell us that, right? Like, I think it's interesting. I think it adds something to the game to be able to stop and put that final period there by switching paradigms from pen and paper to the computer, right? There's sort of a like a, I don't want to call it a distancing because that doesn't give the impression I want, but there's this perception shift, right? That comes along with that movement that I think is really valuable for this game, because it puts that stamp on it of like, this is the thing, I've clicked the button, right? And you don't always get that in a RPG, because there's something powerful about reading the end in a story.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, I think, somewhere else too, if I remember right, but we are working to see if we can kind of capture, to an extent, a little bit of that magic that you would get if you ever read any of those choose your own adventure books, like back in the 80s or whatever, right? I mean, there was something pretty neat about knowing that you got to an end and it was a good end, or maybe it wasn't, right? Yeah.
Did you guys ever used to like put your fingers to the different endings you were reaching to, and then try to go back and get to different I guess everyone did that,
absolutely right? That would violate the code. Yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah.
I used to write down the page numbers so I could reverse my story if I didn't like how something went. Like, I was a little cheater about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I was right there with you. Nice. Well, hey folks, with 17 days, please check it out. Kickstarter.com /project/ Icarus /Cyan-Starlight, or if you just search for Cyan Starlight Kickstarter, it comes up right away. Sounds like it's going to be a fascinating project. They're already unlocking lots of stretch goals, so this is a great time to jump on that bandwagon. So, Will and Alan, been a pleasure talking to you guys. One more time, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Come back, our project about being sad and lonely during the holidays.
Yeah.
Yes. We don't have to be sad and lonely during the holidays.
Be sad and lonely.
Yeah.
The marketing campaign just writes itself, y'all.
It's garbage.
Let's celebrate our seasonal affective disorder together with Cyan Starlight.
Oh no.
So, all right, guys. Thanks for checking out this episode of IGDN Spotlight on the Beth Podcast, and we'll catch you next time.